Hey everybody, I am Joe Marcello, joined as always by my bandit brother Orrin Phillips.
Hey, everybody.
And today is that time of week again where we usher in another comic book day, or as we like to call it, a Dollar Bin Bandit Day. And today we are bringing you our interview with Hilary Barta. Hilary was instrumental in a really cool comic for me. Those of you who have seen the movie House, and the sequel, House 2, well, he worked on the comic book version or comic book adaptation of House 2, which I was a fan of because that was just a wackadoo movie to begin with. And the fact that they put out a comic book of it, even more interesting.
Yeah, he also had a really good run with Plastic Man, did some work on New Mutants, a lot of books, one of the better anchors in the business, and a really interesting, cool guy, a fellow Svengoolie fan, I found out. So we had a lot in common with him.
So, without further ado, this is our interview with Hilary Barta. Thank you so much for joining us, as I said. We're going to ask you the same question we ask everyone to kick it off. How did you get your break into comics?
Well, thanks for having me. Let's see, digging back into the murky memory here. My first comics gig, I had done some local things, fanzine and small press maybe level locally, but the first big national comics, what you would call the big two, came from I was at a Chicago comic book convention, at the time Chicago Comic Con, which became Wizard, and now I think it's becoming something else again. But this was in the early days when I was still a fan artist, but they would let us have space. But I finally felt ready to show my work to an editor. You know, I had a portfolio with me, and Al Milgrom, Marvel editor at the time, was there at the show, and I came up and I showed him my work, and there was very little comics in there. It was mostly illustration, and Al was like, "This is great, but there's no comics, but maybe I could get some inking work." And I said, "Sure, that's fantastic." So that's the very first job I got. He gave me 2 pages to ink of Don Perlin on the Defenders. And it's kind of crazy. I look back at this now. I know people that have tried to get into Marvel for a long time, and who do you talk to? How do you do it? Eventually, they just shut down, the slush pile. People used to just send stuff in the mail, and now they barely even look at that stuff for legal reasons, right? So I think it's changed, but in those days, you could just walk up to an editor and talk to him, and I didn't even have to leave town. This was in Chicago, and Al was the nicest guy in the world. But he gave me 2 pages, and of course, I did a terrible job. And so it took a lot longer to get the next couple pages, but I finally got an issue of the Defenders, and that was like the first full issue. Same artist, Don Perlin. It was a really cool issue too, because the first full issue I did was a tribute to Dr. Seuss, and it was a really great story, and I love Dr. Seuss, and yeah, so that was, from then on, it was a little faster getting one gig after another. But I was pretty bad for a couple of years. I'm still surprised that they kept giving me work, because I didn't know what I was doing, A, and B, so I wasn't very good, but B, I was just so nervous. My work in comics wasn't as good as the work I did before comics, because I was so worried about being on the professional stage. I didn't want to screw it up, and therefore I screwed it up.
Early on in your career, as you mentioned, I mean, you had the chance to work with Al Milgrom, Joe Sinnott, and you started working on The Thing with John Byrne when that series started to kick off. What was that like, working with John Byrne and such an iconic character?
Well, I mean, it was kind of, one of those moments where I'm like, I didn't really believe it was happening, because that was the very first series I ever got to ink. I inked, again, a few stories, an issue, but that was it. That was okay, we're doing this new comic, we want you to be the inker. Ron Wilson was the penciler. John was the writer. I don't believe at the time, I talked to John since then, but I don't think we actually spoke. I sort of got instructions from him, which are basically, I don't care, how you ink it, just don't make the rocks too small. He hated certain artists had started to, Jim Starlin or whoever, I'm not naming names, certainly not putting words into John's mouth, but certain artists started drawing, the thing a little differently than Kirby had, and made the rocks really kind of dinky, and they were getting into details that John thought weren't necessary or weren't appropriate to the character. Anyway, so he's like, that was the one bit of instruction I got from John Byrne. Don't make the rocks too small. And my whole thing was, I'm just going to ink the rocks that Ron put in it. Because as an inker, I was just trying to ink. I wasn't trying to redraw things and do all that. But it was great. I mean, it was intimidating. Again, just working at Marvel at that time was intimidating, and I was brand spanking new to the gig. But I learned a lot while doing it. I started loosening up a little bit doing the thing. I'm a brush inker now, and one of the things I did, which was why my work isn't so great to me now, back then, is I switched to using the pen when I went to do Marvel, when I went to do the inking, because I felt I had more control over it. Even though I liked inking with brush, I didn't feel like I had the control, and I really I didn't want to screw it up. That was my job one, is don't screw it up. But you really can't approach inking that way, because when you're inking has to be loose and free, and I was not exactly quite loose and free. So, but working on that character, one of my favorite comics as a kid was Fantastic Four. Of the few comics I had from the 60s that I still had in the collection, comics probably my older siblings bought. Fantastic Four, Kirby issue where Reed has to go to the negative zone to get the serum because Sue's having the baby, and all of that. It was one of the most exciting, greatest comics I ever read. Thor, also by Kirby, a number of other comics, just really fantastic. So this was this was really comics. Even inking Don Perlin before that, both guys, Perlin and Ron Wilson, they both looked like comics to me. They looked like Marvel artists. They drew they just drew their people were came out of the Kirby or whatever school, especially Wilson would, I think, tried to do Kirby a little bit in his work. Yeah.
I'm always interested and fascinated by when we've been doing this for, a little under a year now. And I'm always fascinated by when we talk to people and the dynamic that they have with either the writer, the inker, the artist, because 9 times out of 10, they're always saying like, oh, well, I never really talked to him. Everything is just done either by mail or, notes or what have you. And, I think as fans, we have this, very naive mentality about that. Everyone is still huddled in, the bullpen, and they're like, hey, man, like elbow to elbow, like, here, do that. And it's really just mind blowing to hear that, like, well, like, yeah, no, I never really spoke to him. But in that vein, you got, John basically told you, like, do this or don't do this. Did that ever really happen a lot, or is that commonplace? Because I'm sure as an artist, you want to impart your own style to whatever, work you're doing.
Did I get a directive like that often?
Yes.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, generally when they hire you, when someone hires an inker or a penciler or anybody, they're hiring that guy to do what they do. I mean, they're hired for a reason. Sometimes they, I'm sure there were artists hired at Marvel, certainly in earlier years, where they're like, can you draw more like Jack? Your work isn't exciting. Can you look at Jack's stuff? Look at the way he did the layouts. Look at these punchy layouts he does. Your stuff is so staid and kind of, a little more sort of formal and little, not as exciting. I know Stan wanted everybody to do that, and some of those artists, John Buscema, I think, really benefited from looking at Kirby and trying to make his work more dynamic, and he became, just fantastic. I don't really remember much of that. There weren't many, in terms of specific artists, specific books where someone would say, don't do this or do that. What you would get, though, is I had eventually, after I worked with Al on a few projects, the editor that I worked with most at Marvel during the years I was working there, the early years, was Carl Potts. And I think Carl was known for helping break in artists. He would discover people and bring them in. Again, he didn't discover me. I mean, I have to give that to Al if it was a discovery. But Al let me be discovered, but Al is great, and Al did like the what was it, Marvel Fanfare. A lot of young artists got their start in this glossy book, but he would give, they weren't ready for a regular Marvel series. He'd give them a story there. He was a champion, I think, of a lot of artists at the start of their career. But in what Carl has really nurtured me a lot. And I remember one thing he told me once, which cracked me up, because again, I was at the beginning, it's pretty clear to me now I was not doing my best work. And I think it was partly because of the tools, but Carl didn't know that exactly. He didn't know what exactly was missing, but he told me something that sounded like an Eastern koan. It was, you've got to loosen up and tighten. And, you're like, what does that mean? And I was just thinking about that for weeks. What the heck is Carl talking about? And at some point it clicked in my brain. It's really the key to everything in life, because if I may extrapolate, but if you learn the craft, if you get down the fundamentals of whatever it is you do, then when you do it, you're simply in the moment doing the thing. You don't have to think, oh, this tab A goes, and you just know that. So in inking, you just practice and practice. So when you're working, you can just let it happen. You don't have to think, how do I make a line? Or what's the type of line do I need? You're more just letting it happen. And in some ways, you have to get out of your own way as an artist to let yourself express the line. I don't mean that to sound artsy fartsy at all. It's really just, you want it to flow, right?
Yeah.
And you look at artists, when some of the guys who are just amazing artists, when you're young and you think style is all about being exact and perfect, you think, oh, Bill Sienkiewicz might be sloppy. But then when you grow as an artist, you realize that these artists that are doing this other way, they're expressing themselves without any kind of restraint. They're just letting it happen. They're free, and the line is more expressive when that's the case. Kyle Baker would ink these pages he'd get. He was inking Marshall Rogers, I think, on something, and millions of little windows in the New York skylines and stuff. He inked them freehand. I would have been sitting there with a ruler and a straight edge and a pen, and I have to make these lines perfect. And when I looked at it, I go, when you glance at this page, you don't think that building's out of perspective or that window's out of whack. You go, that's a building. And then when you look at it a little more closely, you realize this building is actually expressive. The window is expressive. It has some kind of quality that wouldn't be there if you were using technical tools. And that I think what Carl was getting at is just learn the tools and then get used to using them, practice, and then just let it go when you're inking.
Do you think that art today is missing some of that, of what you described, basically that character? Because you have a lot of artists, not all of them, but a lot of them are using computers, and you don't have that natural flow that one might have with pen to paper, because they have all the tools on the computer that one can make those lines exact, and really they could blow up a scene to put that fine detail in those windows that you're describing that weren't you weren't able to do say 10, 15 years ago.
Well, the short answer is maybe and maybe not. It depends on the artist. I think I don't use computers to draw with. The only thing I've done on them is color a little bit, and I don't do much of that. So I can't speak for the guys that do it. And I've seen the work of plenty of my friends that often for them, the choice between whether they're going to eat something, I guess they use the word traditionally now, which is silly to me, but traditionally versus digitally, you should just say inking it versus digital. But anyway, traditionally, they'd say it's a matter of time. It's a little faster inking digitally because there's some shortcuts they can take on certain things. You want to spot blacks, you can just pop in a button and you fill in the black kind of thing.
Right.
But their art is just as expressive. It's as loose as you want to be on the computer. They have all these brushes that mimic computer brushes that mimic real brushes or pens and other kind of lines. So I think it depends on the artist, but I think the danger was, and it certainly is there in the early days of coloring comics and some computer art, is that you do have the ability to blow something up and get into detail, or you have all the bells and whistles. So all of the early color comics look like everybody threw out aesthetics, and now we're just going to add glowy things and highlights and reflected light even when it's not appropriate. And everything was like a coloring book gone wild, like acid color. Someone dropped acid and did a coloring book, and they've settled down. People are going back to actually having palettes and understanding color theory and applying it to the pages. And so I think there was a learning process. There were a couple of years of comics were pretty horrible across the board, but that's changed. And I just don't do digital myself. I just like the feel of the paper. I'm too old to learn that one trick right now, I think. But I mean, literally, but I just don't care. I'm like, I'm doing fine the way I'm doing it. I've been doing it this way for decades. I don't need to change. So.
Fair enough.
You got to work at a comic company that I'm a very big fan of, and that's First Comics. We had Joe Staten on, and did he recruit you, or did you apply to work for them?
Well, Joe was the art director at that time. Later, Alex Wald was the art director. Okay. I don't remember who. I mean, all I know is I got a call because I may have even gone to the office, and I'd heard that this company was opening in Evanston at first. And I was actually, I was born in Chicago and I've spent most of my life here, but Evanston is adjacent. It's a suburb just north of Chicago. That's really where I grew up. And so they were like in my, my childhood hometown, and they were had an office on Davis Street, and I knew that area really well. And I just thought, this is like independent comics, because they pretty much were advertising themselves as an advocate of creator-owned material. I mean, they turned out to be something a little more like a traditional comics company that did creator-owned stuff. They weren't the dream place in that regard. So, not every contract was creator-owned, and I certainly didn't work as a creator there. I worked for hire. Never signed that contract, but I didn't own the work I did. But yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, it was just kind of cool walking in there. And Joe, I love Joe's work. I used to buy his E-Man at Charlton, before he worked at DC or Marvel. I followed his stuff then and saw his stuff at Fanzine. So it was fantastic. Joe's thing is when I was, basically they brought me in to work on Starslayer, and it was a real learning experience. That's when I realized I was not cut out for action adventure comics, certainly not monthly ones. I was brought in to ink Tim Truman, and then they were going to transition me in as an inker penciler, and I was supposed to do it all. And I'd never done anything like that, and somehow they had faith in me. Well, it turns out I was not able to pull it off. I just kept getting further and further behind, and then eventually I became a penciler. I had someone else ink me, a guy named Mark Nelson, who I'm still friends with. Just talking with him earlier today, in fact. Mark's an amazing artist. But it was really, I mean, I wish First Comics turned out to be a slightly different place. There were some great people there, and Joe is one of them. Mike Gold, these guys, I'm still friends with them. Whenever Mike comes back to Chicago to have lunch, we'll have lunch together and stuff. But it just, it was a learning curve there. And the greatest thing about First Comics is they really allowed me to do a lot of writing and drawing. And Munden's Bar was a feature in the back of Grimjack. I don't know if you know Grimjack, and I inked a few issues of Grimjack, but the most fun I ever had was drawing and then eventually writing and drawing backups. I really got to do the whole thing. Who is it?
Sorry about that. I'm hoping my wife picks up.
Oh, we can wait that out. It's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess you got it. No, psych. Okay.
Hoping.
Anyway, it was First Comics. This is for just us. We can cut this out. But yeah, the promise of First Comics, I don't think was kept completely. That it ended kind of messy. They owed a lot of people money. I don't think it was quite the creator-owned paradise that I had sort of naively thought it might be. You know, I left Marvel to go there. I really wanted to go to a smaller company or just do independent books, whatever. I had some sort of idealistic vision, but it didn't quite pan out. But in any case, we can go back to recording now.
I was gonna say, because when you were there, I mean, as far as flagship books went, but you did some stuff with Nexus, Badger, like you said, Starslayer and stuff like that. So you were put on more their marquee books. I'm curious because I've spoken to some people who worked on independent books, and I asked, you know, did you get a lot of feedback on your work? And oftentimes it's no, not really. Just, you know, what they just took what you got. Did you get a good amount of feedback on your work, or was it just they
I mean, I don't, you know, nobody told me how to draw or whatever. Don't give Grimjack a different hat or whatever. I didn't get that kind of feedback. But Joe, as the art director, my work, I think I'm a cartoonist more than an illustrator by nature. I'm somewhere in between. When I describe my own work, I say it's cartoony, but it's realistically lit. So I try to give the thing weight, and I give the figures depth, weight, all that kind of stuff. But their proportions and the anatomy might be exaggerated in a very cartoon way.
Right.
Well, and here I was when I was doing Starslayer. I'm trying to do a relatively straight adventure book, right? And Joe, I remember coming into the office one time, and there was like a photostat of the head, one of the heads, and it had been reduced. At least I asked, what's going on here? He said, well, we had to shrink the head. It was too big. And I had a conversation with Joe about it. He's like, Hilary, your heads are always too big. You know, and Joe is a cartoonist himself. He could draw very cartoony, but he knew when he wanted to do the more realistic stuff, the heads have to be a certain size. And I just naturally draw that my head's large. And now I'm doing my own work. I just draw them like giant, like Basil Wolverton, Big Daddy Roth, giant monster heads. And it's fun. It's great. It's the most fun part of the body to draw, all the expressive features. But I don't have, I never at that stage, certainly, I didn't have complete control over proportions. So I would just always make the head a little bigger. They ended up, and sometimes I realized, God, these really are huge. But they didn't even say anything to me. They were just quietly making a photostat, reducing it down, cutting it, putting it back where the old head was. So it was my head. It was just down to scale a little better. And they did it mostly on I think only on the cover, because it was just stood out too much on the cover. And I couldn't really argue with him, but Joe was just like, yeah, Hilary, all your heads are about 3 sizes too big.
Well, when you talk about your style, though, when What Thou came along, that had to be like, okay, this is a really good match.
Yeah, I mean, humor, I think, or just plain slightly off kilter, weird. It might not always be funny, but it's just odd. I just don't seem to just, I've tried to write straight adventure stories, and I just don't think that's where where I'm best. But What the was, it was a way for me to sort of, even more than doing Not Brand X, the book that it was patterned after, is to go back to Mad. I really wanted to do savage satires like the original, Mad parodies of Superman, Super Duper Man, or Batman, Batboy and Reuben, that kind of stuff. I loved Harvey Kurtzman's work with Wally Wood and Elder and Severin, those guys. To me, those are some of the greatest comics ever.
Yeah.
And frankly, one of my problems drawing action adventure came from reading Mad as a child. I read the paperback reprints, the Valentine books that reprinted the early black or the early color Mad, rather, the comic book Mad. It's hard to draw superheroes and write and think of these stories without, because I'd already read the parodies. I knew someone had already shown me how ridiculous they were on some level from a certain angle. So it was hard to take them seriously. But in particular, I was in the first issue. I told you I'd been working with Carl Potts. And Carl, I'd been getting some jobs inking Punisher covers. And I was just inking one of them. I finally just realized, oh God, I hate this character. I really don't like characters that weren't, this heroes I grew up with were about protecting and saving people. And this guy is just shooting people. I know he's protecting somebody somewhere, but he just was too villainous for me. And I was not crazy about the whole gun thing. So I said, Carl, I really don't offer me any more Punisher. I said, it's great. But when it came around to what I said, I really want to parody the Punisher. He said, go at it. And Carl, I didn't realize at the time, Carl really was one of the creators of the Punisher. So, but he really was happy with the stories I was doing. So I had the plot for the first one. I wrote the plot. I brought Peter Gillis in to write the script. I didn't feel confident writing the script, and he did a fantastic job. And guess what? That story was inked by John Severin, which from Mad. So it was all coming in, perfect circle for me. And I got to talk to John. Gave me the phone number. I call him up. I said, Mr. Severin, I just want to thank you for inking me. He's like, oh, kid, you put it all in the pencils. It was that kind of thing. And then that's not a real impression of him. But it was like that. This old school guy saying, you put all the work in the pencils. But I have one funny story about that. There's a scene at the classic sort of waterfront dive where he goes in to get some information. And he's looking for clues for the something in the plot, and he's trying to find out where these guys are. Anyway, he goes in to ask these guys questions, which means he basically shoots them all. And so I did the cartoony thing where there's this pile of bodies and there's little X's in their eyes, right?
Yeah.
So it's the cartoony thing that they're dead. But because some of those eyes still had the circle around the X, John, who is very fastidious in his inking, thought I was Xing in those things as that's what pencilers do to indicate areas black.
Right.
And thinking he thought that I would put a tiny little X in this tiny little eyeball instead of just penciling it in the left. I just found that so hilarious, that he blacked in the eyeball, because now it looks like the Punisher shot their eyeballs out.
Right.
They're just empty sockets. So it was even more violent. Yeah.
What happened to that issue? It got all really dark all of a sudden. So I know, we discussed a little bit of a horror before we started recording, but in your career, you did have a chance to work on the comic adaptation of House 2, which, by the way, I just picked up those two issues maybe about a month ago, like the first two issues of that. Yeah, I was watching House 1 about an hour ago upstairs.
Okay.
What was it like working on that just wackadoo comic? Because the movie's bananas. And the comic is pretty much the same thing.
Well, I had not seen the movie, so it's not like they sent me a videotape at the time, right? That's before DVDs. I don't think I'd seen it, and I think I tried watching it on TV, and I don't know if I ever made it through it. But what I think I got some Xeroxes of stills or production stills, photos of the actors and stuff, and all I did was the cover, as I recall, in a pin-up page or two. I don't think I did any continuity at all. So I just had that weird, I don't know, with a weird guy with like a cowboy hat and 6 guns or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know who he was, but I just threw everything into that cover because they didn't ask me to do many covers, and I don't know why they thought I would be right for this, but I do love drawing. I don't necessarily like horror movies as much as I like horror. Like, I love older horror films, like black and white classic Universal monster movies and stuff. I love them. The more modern and gory and bloody, the less I'm interested. But I love I had to draw a horror. Let's see, I think there's a zombie hand coming out of the ground in front of a gravestone. There's this weird, creepy, looking guy. There's a haunted mansion behind him and gnarly trees and a moon. Right. I think I might have had a pterodactyl flying in front of the moon. I'm not sure. I don't know why. I don't even know if that's in the movie. But I just threw everything in the kitchen sink into it. A really weird colored job. I don't know if I have that around here somewhere, but it's really colored all over the place. It's like purple and green. In my
stack. I gotta go look for it. It's over there. It's right here.
You can insert it into the podcast. You'll see it's like purple and green and brown. It's really weird.
I'll try to find it.
Okay.
On Oren's next question. But anyway.
I just work from stills that I could get the likenesses and stuff. Yeah.
So what was that creative process like for a property that's not necessarily obviously it's for a comic book company, but it's not necessarily like Marvel created. So is there like a different creative process for that? Like you have to get sign-offs from, everybody and their brother, like today would be
Yeah,
absolutely crazy.
well, I went into it kind of naively. I've since worked on a lot of licensed properties where I found out just the hoops you had to jump through.
Right.
On that particular job, I have a feeling I just sent in my pencils to Marvel, got approval and inked it. Right? I don't remember having to make any changes. And I was working for photos, so I didn't have a lot. It would have been pretty tough for me not to draw the likeness, because if that's what they were worried about. But I don't remember redrawing at all. And interestingly enough, someone wrote me about it. I had drawn something. I had this cover, similar vintage. I think I was doing it right after that. I think I either did it on spec or it was a book that was planned at Marvel. I think they were going to do Creepshow.
Okay.
And I have the whatever this character is. He looks kind of like a janitor. I mean, he's an old kind of Uncle Creepy like guy.
Yeah.
But he's just wearing a jacket and stuff. I've done drawing of him, and I think he's doing the classic thing of gesturing to the open grave or something. And I couldn't figure out where that came from. And a writer, me and the guy who was asking me about it, we put it up on the internet, and I think the guy who wrote the script for the comic said, "Oh yeah, that comic they started in." There was a whole history to why it didn't happen, but apparently, it was a job that I thought I might have done it on spec. Like I was just somehow, I'm going to draw Marvel. I heard Marvel's doing it, so I'll draw a cover on spec. Turns out that maybe I actually had the gig. I can't remember. I guess I could go look through my back taxes and look at my check stubs. Did I get paid for Creepshow? But yeah, there's a number of things that are kind of like murky. Like what happened there? Why didn't that comic happen? Or why did I get that job? Or who? You asked me about Al Milgram. I remember that because that was the big break. But there's a lot of years at Marvel where I don't even remember who I was working with, because when I was an inker, I did have the thing, but after that, I never really had a regular book until Power Pack, and I didn't even do every issue of that. John Bogdanov and I would do a few issues, and there'd be different artists, occasionally June Brigman, other people. But that was the closest I came to another regular book at Marvel. What I was hired to do often was just last minute jobs. I'd get a call on Friday, say, "Hilary, how many pages can you do this weekend? We've got a rush job." And I'd say 3. So they'd FedEx you a package, you'd get it on Saturday, clean it up, and you'd have to FedEx it either Monday morning or whatever. And Marvel had this thing called combat pay if you had to work over the weekend on a rush job, and you'd get rate and a half. And I actually liked getting to work because you made half again as much. But I was constantly working on 2 pages from a book, so I didn't know what the script was, because you're just getting this stuff last minute, and there might not be lettering. Back then there were a lot of books, and most books were lettered, but sometimes things were so late, the lettering would be pasted up. It wasn't computer lettering; it was just hand lettered on an overlay, and then they would paste it onto the art that they'd make a stat from. So often I didn't even know what the stories were, or I seldom talked to the artist because I'm getting 2 or 3 pages of a book, and then the next week I'd get 2 or 3 pages from a different guy in a different book. It was kind of fun, just getting this crazy stuff thrown at me. But you never were able to get in a groove with an artist.
This has nothing to do with any of this, but this is really for my own knowledge. But do you think, like, the way you're, that creative process you're describing, where you're given, okay, here's X amount of pages to do, and beyond that, you don't really, have much of you're not really informed of what else is going on. Knowing the full scope of the comic and the story, does that help you impart some little extra into the art of it?
Well, at some point when I would get books that weren't lettered, I would ask the editors, "Please send me the script," because I just wanted to know,
Right.
And you didn't want to make a bonehead decision and say, "Oh, I'll add something to this panel," but it's going to screw up the script, like it's going to conflict with the story, whatever that might be. I can't imagine right now, but there, you might decide you're going to tear some clothing or whatever it is you might do that would affect the story. But yeah, I would prefer to at least know what's going on. I like comics that are lettered. I mean, they always look better when they're lettered than boards.
Mhm.
The placement, the fine tuning of things when you're an inker and you're inking around a balloon. I can't tell you how many times a letterer would put a balloon, say, on the edge of a hand or a face, and so you just move the thing over, right? You just redraw the hand, or you change the position of a finger or whatever it is. You can make adjustments that you can't do if they're pasting it up later, because then they might just put it right back over the hand. Those sort of things. And it's nice to know what's going on, because then you understand why things are the way they are. You just know what's going on. You're just a little more invested in. It's not just lines on paper. You kind of, oh, this character's going through. He's worried about his mom here. That kind of helps you get into the mood and the feeling of what's happening.
Got it. That's interesting.
Superheroes aren't worried about their moms. They're worried about world annihilation or something.
Right. Well, their moms are involved too, I would assume.
Yeah, their mom might be annihilated.
So shifting from Marvel to DC, you had a chance to work on Plastic Man.
Woohoo!
Which is an awesome character.
My favorite superhero.
I remember the Plastic Man cartoon show as a kid, and there was a live action portion of it it was like, the Plastic Man that would intro the next segment. And that was my first introduction to Plastic Man. Ever since then, he was just cool. And, he's gone through so many, like, not changes, but, he's been like a major player in the Justice League and been here, been there. So it's been no, they don't like that. I liked it. But, well,
I'm happy you like it. No, I think he's such a distinctive character. I'm happy that that if it would keep him out and do what he does, what other superheroes don't do, that humorous storyline. Just being put on. I don't want to get on the soapbox here. You can finish your thought first before I go in.
Well, no, I mean, really, I just wanted to hear about that experience of being a part of that, being part of that character.
Well, because you asked about the animation, have you seen the pilot that Stephen DeStefano did the storyboards for? Have you ever seen it? It's an animated, purely animated. You can find it. Look up Plastic Man, Stephen DeStefano. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's fantastic.
Okay.
I never really saw the Saturday morning cartoon that you're talking about. I mean, that was not something I was watching. So, but that is really great, and it's really captures that. What Jack Cole, the creator of Plastic Man, really brought to it. It's just really wacky and the animation is very expressive. No, my only problem with bringing Plastic Man into the DC universe and kind of really got stuck in there is then he's just another character. He doesn't have his own world that he's in. I mean, Jack Cole did something different, and then it's kind of like taking Captain Marvel out of the CC Beck world and trying to make him fit into everything else. It just drains a character of its uniqueness. There's just too much on the corporate side, too much concern over a coherent universe and not about individual achievements and what they do. They're trying to make a corporate product that's sort of all generic in some way. I'm being a little harsh here. They do have like creators, have a lot of license, but for me, it's like, just let Plastic Man be Plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's me. That's my take on it. So working on that miniseries was fantastic. That miniseries was given to Phil Folio. I got in only because Phil had never heard of the character. I don't think he had ever heard of him, but he wasn't really familiar with him. And Phil lived here in Chicago. I was friends with him, and our mutual friend Doug Rice told me about this. I think, hey, did you hear Phil was offered Plastic Man, but he's not sure he's going to do it? I said, what? And I think I just practically jumped on Phil saying, hey, Phil, let me draw it. You can write it, I'll draw it. I had to get in on that character. And so I kind of just elbowed my way into doing the series.
Yeah. Your style of art really lends itself to that character. I mean, it just, big head, small head, it really doesn't matter, because this is a guy that, that stretches and his
eyeballs can be huge.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I did draw his head on the cover. He's very large a few times, but of course he's coming at you. Yeah, no, I mean, I love doing it. I mean, look, I think Jack Cole is one of the top cartoonists in comics. He's in my top three. But it's just the character is so great. Those stories, Cole's original stories, are so imaginative. They're so creative. Every single one. And he did splash pages as good as Will Eisner or as anybody back in that and funnier. But and what I did when I got the job, I told Mike Gold. Mike Gold was the guy. He wasn't the editor, but he was the guy who put the book together. He said, I said, look, I really want to do this in the Jack Cole style. He's like, that's fine, you know. But we kind of had to explain why Plastic Man was funny, why he was cartoony, which was kind of a drag. But that, again, the continuity thing, you know. But other than that little caveat of sort of having to do the reality checks, I was able to draw it as to the best of my ability in the style of Cole. And I went back and started buying as much Cole as I could and really trying to soak up his style and let it inform, you know, how I drew it. And I really tried to draw Plastic Man, the face and the little details as much as Cole as I could. I think, you know, in some cases, maybe I went a little too far, but I was just, you know, if that's an homage, it's an homage, you know, but I really, I don't know. It's just, you know, it was a dream. And just like doing What That, it's just like my chance to do a sort of mad-like story. This was doing Plastic Man. It's like, I don't know how lucky a guy can get. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, yeah. Unfortunately, there aren't enough of those kind of jobs in comics. Most of them are like, we're gonna fight now, and it's very serious. Okay, yeah. Let me come up with a new wrinkle on Batman.
Well, I think those. I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, like, I think those comics that do impart a certain amount of levity to the overall comic world really are quite valuable. I mean, and I mean that story wise, and you know, to the reader, because I mean, look, they're superheroes, either characters wearing tights or flying and doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff. If you can't laugh at it once in a while, and everyone's gonna be a brooding asshole, then like it's kind of boring after a while.
Brooding asshole sounds like a 1980s character. I think he was one of the darker guys.
That was my name in high school. No.
Yeah. Never stand behind burning asshole. Yeah. You know, I think, you know, well, all you have to do is look at like Golden Age books. There was a range. They did anthologies, and anthologies have always kind of been my favorite comics because you get a variety of stories, and you would get the earnest, serious superhero, and then you would get, you know, lighter stuff, and you'd get you get text pages and gag panels and whatnot. But they weren't afraid to put this stuff in the same book, and then at some point companies were like, oh, this doesn't fit our, you know, whatever our you know, our trademark style.
Mm-hmm.
It's too goofy. But you know, there have always been a few guys that have injected more humor into their work. You know, Keith Giffen would do some pretty hilarious stuff. There's a number of creators that they satisfied the fans of the heroes, but they did action adventure, but they also put a lot of wacky stuff in there. And there's a number of guys that do that, right? There still is humor in comics, but it wasn't as wide open as it used to be. You know, Marvel was a little more formulaic, you know, and has been for a long time. Yeah.
Well, speaking of brooding books, and this was a book that kind of took off, or it's a line of books that took off. I'm talking about New Mutants. You know, when you got that book, Rob Liefeld, I believe that's how you pronounce it, a very sort of distinct style. A challenge for you to ink his stuff?
Well, we never really connected artistically. I mean, we come from different schools, and I think when he inked his own work, he certainly would use a pen, and if he had his brothers, he would have had an inker that was more of a pen inker. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to take stuff that looked all thin line kind of pen work to me in the pencils, and add a little more weight with it, with the brush outlines and stuff. But I did ink a lot of this stuff with pen because you kind of had to.
Right.
And you know, I don't think he was completely happy with everything I did. I tried to add shadows here and there, which is not his forte. But then I remember, like, you know, he's like, oh, I think the Blob was coming around a corner, and I put a cast shadow where you do this thing where like you just sort of, if you're near any kind of wall, you can just throw a shadow on a character. And then you just have the place in shadow, the part of the body in shadow, you just do half flip, right? So one side has got the little backlight coming in. It's a trick Wally Wood and a lot of artists use. But he's like, oh, I like that. So I knew that if we had probably worked together more, maybe we could have figured out the middle where we could meet. Right. But it was really a case where I knew he wasn't happy, and ultimately I wasn't happy doing it. But you know, I love the paycheck. You know, it was a great selling book. Those were the years of Marvel working on any X-related book.
Yeah,
it just sold like crazy, and you know, you do the work, you get your page rate, and then a month later you get a check for more than your page rate, and you're like, what in the heck? You know, I never saw money like that before. Yeah. You know. So that was wonderful, and I stuck it out probably longer than I should have because of the paycheck. But you remember one time, Rob, I mean, he just had a very specific vision, and it just wasn't mine, right? It's a different artistic vision. But there, on the border of one of the pages, he went in and said the 3 type of lines he's looking for. He had it down to 3. You know, I want this line like this, and they were very specific. And it's like, whenever I see that stuff, I go, well, why isn't this guy working with him? Why isn't he doing it himself, or why isn't he working with someone else? Because that's not what I do. Right. Why did an editor put me on this guy? And I had to think that they wanted me to add a little more weight to it. But you know, I have a feeling if he did it exactly the way he wanted to, it probably would have sold better, because that's what his fans wanted. They were his fans. They weren't my fans. Right. I mean, I'm told by people come up and bring those books. All the Marvel stuff is what people bring for me to sign generally. You know, as well as the books sell. You know, what that would sell like this, and you know, New Mutants sold like this. So people will bring up what to me, but then there'll be 10 guys who bring up New Mutants still to sign. You know, and they'll say, "Oh, we loved your inking on Robin." I'm like, "Oh, great." You know, that's cool. They liked it. It just, I knew then with the whole style that Image was doing, where more and more pen work, more and more fine lines, I was just doing something else. I was going more and more for heavy shadows and bolder lines, and comics were moving more into this thing where suddenly everybody was you couldn't do a black shadow. Everything had to have lines in the shadow that reflected light. You know, stuff that like Jim Lee and Scott Williams kind of trademarked. Right. And everybody else soon, you know, people like Mark Silvestri were doing that, and they had been like a modern John Buscema, really gutsy drawing, and he was getting a little more particular and, you know, detail oriented. It was, I think that settled down a little bit, but there's still a lot of that kind of drawing in comics. You know, it's just, to me, it's needless fussy detail. It's not. Yeah.
I was about to say, did you get, as an artist, the frenzy that was around? You know, the Image artists at the time. You know, it
was everyone. I mean, it was there. You go to a convention and suddenly they have crowds for these artists. I mean, it was huge. And I did a book for Image when they all went to Image, right. And you know, after New Mutants and, you know, Wolverine and everything that Mark and those guys were doing, Spider-Man in the case of Todd. When they went to Image, Mark said, "Hilary, you ought to do a book for us. You ought to come in now while the getting's good." Mark and I were friends. I knew him from Chicago. And so I finally did one comic for him. I did Stupid. And nobody there was prepared for me doing a parody book. They're like, what the heck? You know, it really didn't fit into what Image was doing either. But yeah, it was crazy. That book sold like nuts, you know, and I don't know how many of those copies are actually read by people, or if they have 5 or 10, you know, a stack of them in a box. I don't really know whether it accurately reflected readership. Right. But, you know, and that whole era ended with the bubble exploding, right? The crash, which kind of, you know, put the lie to these were genuine sales. They were inflated sales. They were, it was a boom, a collector boom, a speculator boom, that kind of thing. And I think we're a little closer back to reality now.
Yeah. Yeah. What you just talked about with Stupid, I always got the suspicion that everyone was in on the joke with it. You know, personally, that they knew that this was going to be sort of a spoof book. But
the Image guys, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, nobody asked for a script or pencils. I didn't have an editor. Image Comics was really, you talk about a company, the thing about Image Comics, say what you will about them. People would tell me later, oh, how do you feel about your book getting canceled? And aren't you angry? And all this other stuff. And I was like, you mean someone hired me to do a book and said I could do whatever I want, and then it sold better than anything I did, and they gave me all of the profits, and I'm going to be mad at them?
Right.
Like, no, it was the greatest thing that ever happened. You know, I mean, I bought a house with the money from that comic.
Yeah.
You know, the down payment. But you know, it's like, I don't understand. People that always think there's a soap opera behind the works where everybody hates each other, and I'm like, no, it's not perfect, but it just, you know, I know they knew I was doing a parody book at some point. When you announced the book's name is stupid, they knew it wasn't the new Cyber Force, but
but what is?
But I remember when they canceled the book, I mean, you know, there's always was press then. They got crazy press. Everybody wanted to interview you. And Todd was interviewing me, and they said, well, what, you know, they're asking him about all these cancellations. And Todd said, well, we canceled stupid because, you know, it was stupid. So that
sums it up.
That was his comment. But I think what was obvious is what they were doing is they kind of, when Image happened, those guys were all like swamped. They didn't, suddenly they're managing a company, they're making millions of dollars, and they weren't getting the books out because they were pulled left and right. And some of the guys worked, you know, stuck to the books a little more. Eric Larson certainly did, and Todd did. But everybody else was like, oh my God, I'm now, you know, I'm not like some kind of, I'm running a corporation. But what they did is, I think they expanded real fast, and they let everybody do what they wanted. And at some point they realized they needed to pull back, and they did need a sort of an identity, where we lost it a little bit. But then eventually they became this great independent publisher that had really, comics are not this, you know, would never have been the same if Image wasn't there. They really did finance all kinds of creative projects for people. So Image has been a definite plus. At the time of when their style was taking over and people at Marvel were getting old time guys to try to draw on the Image style, I was just like, I'd kind of like wince, you know, seeing, you know, Sale Buscema or somebody trying to draw this way. And you knew he was just like, oh my God, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I spent years trying to simplify, and now I'm putting in all the doohickeys or whatever. I'm sure they weren't happy about it. But a lot of bad comics were made as a result. But Image as a force was, I think, has always been a force for good overall. So, yeah. I mean, and they've definitely held, you know, Marvel. They're the first company to really challenge Marvel and DC, right? So,
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you could say the big two nowadays. I mean, because Image is, you know, huge, and they're putting out a lot of really good comics that rival, you know, Marvel and DC. And I'm a DC guy. I have no problem saying that. So, I mean, you know, Image is doing pretty damn well.
I mean, my own feeling on it is, you know, you can fall, if you're a DC guy, so you probably love characters, right? There are characters that maybe they imprinted themselves on you when you were young. You read Superman or Batman or whatever it is, and it's always going to have a thing for you, you know.
Right.
But for me, I was a guy who was not, even though I read Marvels, and I was more of a Marvel guy just because that's what my older brothers brought home. So I just loved the Marvel characters, and that world was more the thing I was into. When I became an artist, I was interested in the artists. So it didn't matter where they were. Marvel, DC, doing their own book. If it was their art, I was into it. And when I was into story, the same thing. I wanted to read what Steve Gerber was writing, no matter where he was going to write it. It happened to be Marvel, but he really wasn't a Marvel writer, you know, exactly. You know, he wasn't a house writer. He wasn't like Roy Thomas or somebody that kind of tried to write Stan Lee style or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I'm making a point there or not.
No, I'm with it. I did find,
maybe it's a bump. Maybe I don't know.
I did find my issue of House.
Oh, there you go. Now, you can see there's like weird color choices, purple and green on the gravestone. I don't know.
No, there's a lot going on here. There is a house in the background with, as you said, some gnarly trees. There is what appears to, you know, it's like a zombie hands coming out, this creepy cowboy.
The creepy cowboy.
And then you have not one, but two pterodactyls in the background.
Two, I did put two in there.
There are two, yeah.
And they're mummy hands. Right now I'm realizing they're
Right,
mummy.
yeah.
Is there? I guess there is a mummy in this thing, isn't there? That
Yeah,
is
there's a lot that happens in this.
And so, think about it from my perspective. I hadn't seen the movie. I didn't know what the story was. I just knew that there was a mummy in there. There were pterodactyls in there. So I'm like, I'm throwing it all on the cover.
Well, what I find funny about it is, so the not funny, haha, but funny, interesting is like, so like the cowboy on the cover is a lot way scarier than the one portrayed on the inside, which I always think is very interesting, because covers are always, not always, but many times misleading as to what's going on in the comic. Not necessarily in this case, that's just more of a general statement. Like, you'll have like the so-and-so appears finally, and it's not until the very last panel of the last page of that comic or that someone, you know, makes their return. The whole comic has nothing to do with that. But
how many comics have the most earth-shattering development since whatever? And, you know, they show whoever laying on the ground, the superhero, often the superheroes laying on the ground, dead, all, you know. And then you open it up like, oh, he was just sleeping in the actual book or something.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
like,
every comic is billed as the most earth-shattering comic, compared to the one that came out right before.
It's pulse-pounding and earth-shattering.
Yeah, it'll change the landscape forever. But it didn't. What I did like about this is that
whatever you do this month, you must read. You know,
this has to happen. This is a full comic. There is not one advertisement through it, and there's like 45 pages of content. So I mean, this would be considered a double-sized issue by today's standards, because there's the advertisement that is in it, it's for another comic book series,
you know what, Joe? It's a full house.
Yeah.
Full house. It's a fuller house. Anyway. So I'm going to be mindful of your time, but I have to ask you.
Why? I'm not.
No, well,
I'm just missing another Hawaii 5-0
rerun. You worked on an Elseworlds story, one of which that I think is one of the most badass ones. It's the
is that the Apocalypse one?
Yes. Where Superman, instead of landing on Earth, lands on Apocalypse and is raised by Darkseid, and is just absolutely awesome. I have the figure somewhere over there. Can't find it. Anyway, working on Superman in a alternate version, if you will, what kind of experience was that like for you?
Well, I mean, for me, it was mostly artistic thing. I was working with my friend Kieran Dwyer, who I've worked with. I mean, we've been pals since we first met. He was, to me, one of the great artists of that era. You know, he worked at Marvel, he worked at DC. He's done his own comics. He's done a lot of stuff with Rick Remender in recent years at Image, I think. But mostly he makes his living in advertising. He's not doing comics. He does a lot of political cartoons. He's on the internet.
Interesting.
Yeah, he did a what was it called? Unprecedented was his Trump cartoon. He collected all these cartoons he was doing. Because he's always been interested in humor. And when he self-published a book, it was a very savage humor book called Lowest Comic Denominator. I think he recently might have collected it. It's some pretty wild stuff. But Kieran just draws so well. It was so much fun to ink him. I don't, you're inking stuff. I don't remember if that stuff was lettered or not, or if it was lettered on overlay, but it's just so gutsy. And at the beginning, I remember the beginning of the story, Kieran was looking for reference for how he wanted to draw Apocalypse. And someone had given me a book on blast furnaces, and which, if you know what those are, they're incredible. These buildings with the pipes on the outside, basically, and they look like Giger buildings almost. Imagine with all the tubes and the pipes. And I was like, and I think I was just photocopying pages from the book and mailing it to him. It's like, Kieran, you got to look at this stuff. It's just, this was really good. And he used a lot of that. Like, it's this real industrial kind of 1984 kind of environment. Right. And so there's some of that, I think, in the book. but no, it's just the gutsy drawing. It's so much fun. I mean, there's action stuff in there. There's Apocalypse and Superman are fighting at one point, right? I mean,
Yes.
he's fighting some big chunky monster guy. I can't even remember if the guy had a name, but maybe you can fill this stuff in for me. But anyway, it was just a beautiful looking book. It was fun to ink, you know. John Francis Moore was the writer, right?
Let me check.
Is it Moore?
Yes.
Because we did two. We as a team did two of those miniseries. One with
John Francis Moore.
One with Batman and Superman, I think, and one with just Superman.
Yes. Yeah. There's Elseworlds Finest, which was Superman and Batman, and then you had Superman: The Dark Side.
Yeah, Superman: The Dark Side. No, that was those were fun, but just doing that much work with Kieran. I mean, it was really I mean, so much of it for me is just it's like you're having a party with your friend.
So when you're working on like Superman and Batman, for that matter, the tentpole characters for DC, are you now, given that, I mean, they are not the conventional stories, they're Elseworlds, so there's a little bit more latitude, I'm assuming, but are you given free reign on something like that to kind of
Kieran was I inked what he gave me. No one ever, this is not a case where anybody corrected a face. I mean, I know when they collected the miniseries, I didn't get to ink the cover, and I think it was Carl Kiesel did it, and I think he had a slightly slicker way of doing the characters. I think that's why they gave him the cover. I'm just gonna, if Kieran's doing it rough, I'm gonna do it rough. I just want to be in the spirit of the penciler. I'm not gonna pretty it up, or because as an inker, to me it's always about the penciler. If I connect with the guy, I want to fulfill his vision to the best of my ability. If I don't connect with him, and we've talked about that a little bit, it's not as easy. It's different. It's a little more difficult. But Kieran inking John Bogdanov. There's a number of guys inking even Mark Silvestris. So I just love inking them. There's just some guys that just you could just exactly what they're doing, and it fits. It's right in your wheelhouse. Kieran was one of those guys. So it was just fun. Yeah. Cool. The other series, I inked that mostly with the brush. When I did the Elseworlds Finest, because it was set back in the 20s or 30s, I decided to ink with a pen to try to add more of the older, illustration line style of that era. Not that I was mimicking any particular artist, but trying to evoke the era of, newspaper illustration with line art that wouldn't have heavy blacks. They'd do, the Joseph Clement Coles or Franklin Booth kind of era. I'm not that good, but that's the kind of general style I'm going for. I think it was a little less successful because it just, Kieran stuff is just so gutsy. I kind of like doing the Apocalypse one a little more, but they're both fantastic. There's a sequence at the end of one of the issues. Maybe it's at the end of the whole thing with a plane crashing. And I didn't get to ink all that because I was running behind on the schedule, and another guy came in to help. He did a great job. I was like, those pages were so great. This giant plane, and Kieran's so dynamic. Oh man. Anyway, when you kind of feel a little territorial if you're the inker, and then you're falling behind. They're like, well, we're going to give these pages over to, and you're like, no. If I'm late, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't blame anybody else for that. So.
Has there been, and this is the last question before we let you go, but considering all the characters that you've had a chance to work on over the years in your career, has there been one that you've wanted to really sink your teeth in more, or just you never got the chance to and wanted to do so, like one that really sticks out for you?
Well, I never worked on Doctor Strange, but I did a parody of Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange was my favorite Marvel character in a lot of ways. I just love Steve Ditko. I never wanted to draw Spider-Man. It's not a superhero guy, and that is one crazy ass costume to draw. But you really have to know what you're doing drawing that costume. But Doctor Strange, I loved him, and when I did the Doctor Strange parody, Doug Rice, my writing partner, and I did that. We kind of did a Strange Tales issue. I did Doctor Strange, and Doug did Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And it was really an homage to Ditko as much as a parody of the character. I didn't really have anything I needed to make fun of. Whereas with the Punisher, oh, I wanted kids to laugh at that character. Doctor Strange, I was just having fun with the character, I think. And I did, God, Chuck Dixon and I did a Plasmo story at Bongo. Plasmo is this mystical character in their superhero universe there with Radioactive Man. And that was a Doctor Strange story. There's, so I've done 2 or 3 of them with Doctor Strange, even though I never actually worked on the character himself. I don't know that I would actually want to do a straight Doctor Strange story or not, but if they were asked me what to do, I would say Doctor Strange, because in fact, the last job I did at Marvel, the first job in many years, was a job for this book that Alex Ross had put together or curated called Marvel.
Oh yeah, yes.
You saw that and followed.
Oh yeah.
And he basically asked all his artists he wanted to work with or friends that he wanted to give a job to at Marvel. It said, what character would you like to work on? You can work on any character you want. And I said, Doctor Strange. And Alex said, any character but Doctor Strange. And that's because like 5 other guys before me that he talked to had all said Doctor Strange. So someone couldn't get Doctor Strange, they did Wong. But Alex was doing a thing with Doctor Strange. Mitch O'Connell did a Doctor Strange. And so then Alex said, well, okay, if you're not doing Doctor Strange, what character? And it took me a couple of minutes, and I said, how about the Kirby Monsters? Before Marvel became Marvel. Mm-hmm. It was still Atlas or whatever the heck, or not Atlas, but whatever they call themselves. Periodical something or other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it was Atlas in the 50s. But anyway, right before Marvel, I don't know if they even had a company name on the books. Anyway, I did a story featuring those characters. So that's how far removed I am from superheroes. We did fit Dr. Drummond there, who was the precursor to Doctor Strange. A very obscure character for most people, but he was Doctor Strange before Doctor Strange did. So that's another character that I did sort of Doctor Strange-ish. I put the window, the spirit window that Doctor Strange has, with the 3 bars.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
I do, yes. So you mentioned
your question. I don't know.
Yes, no, definitely.
But which character would I want to do more? Well, I wanted to do more Splash Brannigan, but once Alan Moore left, they just didn't think there was any point in going on. But I would have continued to write and draw, and that kind of broke my heart that I couldn't do that. That would have been fun to continue that character, because I had a few. I thought I had a few good ideas for stories, but what are you going to do?
So just for fun, what do you think of, since you mentioned Doctor Strange, what do you think of the MCU version of Doctor Strange that we've been seeing in the movies?
I haven't seen any of the movies.
What?
I'm that odd duck because I'm not that interested in the characters so much as the comics and the artists. So the movies to me have in some ways no connection to the comics. They're just like some other thing. I did see the first Spider-Man movies, when they first started coming out with actual CGI and they could do this stuff pretty well.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the first 2 Spider-Man movies up to a point, though I won't go into my film criticism here. But by the time the 3rd one came out, I was like, eh. And then I really was like, did not go to see a lot of Marvel movies after that. So I'm an odd guy that way. I don't really care about the superhero movies. I'm not waiting for the next one to come out and so forth.
Fair enough.
But I've seen the ads for the latest one was the Eternals, right? And I'm looking at the ads and just looking at the commercials. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to see that. That doesn't look like Kirby to me.
No.
I'm not a stickler for that. To me, a movie is a movie, and if they did a great movie but it wasn't a comic, that would be okay with me. I wouldn't hold their foot to that.
That was I saw that a couple of weeks ago. And my one, I had a few criticisms for it, but the one that really stuck out for me is they took the Kirbiness out of it.
Yeah.
So, they've shown Eternals, the beings not Eternals, the Celestials, in other versions of another MCU movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and I think maybe another. And those portrayals of Celestials, they looked like the Kirby versions. And that's what got me excited about Eternals, thinking, well, okay, I'm going to see more of that because this whole world is predicated on the work he did. So I was hoping to see that style, and it was completely washed of it. I mean, you saw something that resembled it, but it was not that. And I was like, that's balls, man.
Yeah, you know, I've seen people talking about it, and they didn't put it quite that way. That it was like Kirby's balls were removed, you know, kind of thing. Okay, I'm not putting words or balls into your mouth, but you didn't say that. Okay, you didn't say that. I just said, but you know, the fact
that was a much funnier way of putting
it. But when I was reading these comments, I just said, you know, to me, the answer to all of this is just let Bruce Timm do an animated version of these characters. Forget this live action stuff. Just give them $30 million to do the ultimate animated Kirby animated film. It would be mind-boggling. People would love it. Right. It would be fantastic. Imagine what he could do with all of the giant stuff that Kirby would do, all of the crazy world stuff. You know, even just down to the squared off fingers and the Kirby hands and all that.
Yeah,
it would be fantastic. And there's no way that live actors, even though they always will strike a certain pose from a cover to where all the comic fans that ooh and ah over, it's like, no, it's not really the comics, and it can never be the comics. It becomes about those actors. And this is another rant that I could go on, but when I was younger, going to conventions, like back when I got my first job with Al Milgrom, at every convention there would be what they would call a masquerade, and masquerade was Saturday night, and almost all of the people in the masquerade were children that would come to the convention and dress up as different characters, and they'd do a little thing on the stage, and then they would give prizes for the best costumes and stuff. Well, that evolved into cosplay. And how did that happen? Where adults are dressed up and the costumes become more and more like it. It's because people saw real people dressed as these characters in movies where they weren't ridiculous, like the 1940s kind of superhero movies, where, you know, it wasn't just, you know, you could see the scenes or whatever, but they somehow had turned it into something where people said, oh, this is sexy. Like, these Hollywood actors have giant muscles, or they're super powered. They believed it. And now they're all dressing up like it. So it's, to me, it's like I look at those movies and they look like cosplay. It's just a weird thing. Yeah. Superheroes are lines on paper to me. It feels much more realistic because the world is perfectly unified. It's all in an artist's style. They're more believable, no matter how believable CGI ever becomes. It's never going to be the same. Yeah, I will never believe that a character is the Hulk the way I believe Jack Kirby could draw the Hulk, or Herb Trimpe or something like that. It's never going to be the same. And it's like, it's comics is an art form. It's not just an idea form for Hollywood. And and I know we know that. You guys are comic fans, but most of the world from now on, when they think of these characters, they're immediately thinking of the movie version. They are not thinking of they think of Iron Man. It's not you name the artist and the writer that worked on that character. They're thinking of Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, it's gonna be that way because Hollywood just dominates the real universe we live in. Not the Marvel universe. But yeah, okay, that's my negative rant for the night.
No, we definitely appreciate your point of view on it.
I'm old enough and sour enough, and I don't need work from Marvel or DC, so now I can dump them. I saw Ant-Man and I got a kick out of it. That was fun. I think I saw it on a plane, but I enjoyed it.
That's a kind of, we don't really care what happens. We're gonna have fun with this movie type of a movie.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. Yeah.
So before we go, where can our listeners, fans, anyone who sees us or hears it, where can they see your work, follow you, etc., all the good stuff?
Well, I mean, I'm on the old internet, so I'm all over the place. But I do have a website, hilarybarta.com, one L in Hillary, and I also have a Patreon page, which I don't know if it's Hilary Barta / Patreon, but my Patreon page is free. So, and what I do on it is I do my process. I show from pencil sketch all the way to finished inks how I do my drawings. And, so you don't have to give me any money. You can just show up and look at the stuff, and I still want people to come and see it. So please do. I really would love people to participate, give me feedback. I'd love to know what you think. But I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that. I put my stuff up there. So I do a thing called Screwy Tuesdays on the internet. I do a hashtag if you want to find it. But I just do a wacky drawing and post it every Tuesday. So
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely include all of that information on their show notes. So, Hilary, thank you so much for spending time with us and just talking to us. We really appreciated all of this. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. And next time I want Orrin to say something, okay?
Awesome.
Welcome back, everyone. So that was our interview with Hilary Barta. Pretty cool guy. A little quirky, I must say, but absolutely really fun to talk to. I really enjoyed our interview with him.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. Old movie fan like myself, but the work he did with so many different artists, it's incredible, and it was really a joy to speak to him.
So you know what to do. Like, subscribe, follow. The socials. I won't bother you with that, but just make sure you join us again. Our next episode coming at you on Friday. So you guys have a good rest of your week.